Amina was a young, intelligent girl living in a small African village, nestled near the edge of a vast, unexplored jungle that loomed ominously beyond the village's borders. Despite the natural beauty around her, her life was far from idyllic. Her father, a respected village elder, had passed away several years ago, leaving her in the care of her stepmother, Jamila, a woman who was anything but kind. Amina's mother had passed when she was much younger, and her father's death left her vulnerable, especially to Jamila's cruelty. Jamila, a bitter and envious woman, always believed Amina was a threat to her place in the family and the village. She saw the young girl as a rival to her power and influence. Driven by jealousy, Jamila mistreated Amina in every way possible, from forcing her to take on the hardest chores to belittling her at every turn. Jamila did everything in her power to break Amina's spirit. Despite the harshness she faced, Amina remained resilient. Though she felt alone, deep down she knew she had a strength within her that could not be easily extinguished. The tension between Amina and Jamila grew, and the young girl began to realize that she had to endure the abuse, for there was no one else who would stand up for her. Jamila's cruelty toward Amina grew worse with each passing day. At first, it had been small things, harsh words, orders that were impossible to fulfill, and a general disdain that filled every corner of their home. But as time wore on, her mistreatment escalated into something darker. She would assign Amina the most grueling tasks, things that would break the spirit of even the most determined person. Fetching water from the river in the heat of the day, collecting firewood from the jungle's dangerous outskirts, and cleaning the entire house from top to bottom were just a few of the chores Jamila forced her to do. No matter how hard Amina worked, it was never enough for Jamila. She was always there, waiting to criticize, to belittle, to remind Amina that she was worthless and inferior. Amina learned to live with the insults, but each one chipped away at her confidence, leaving her feeling more like a servant than a daughter. The villagers, who saw the constant abuse, started to take note of the tension in the household. They would whisper about Jamila's cruelty whenever they passed by Amina's home, but no one dared intervene. Jamila held a powerful sway over the village, her family wealth and influence granting her protection from any real consequences. The villagers feared her wrath more than they cared about Amina's suffering. They would pretend not to notice, turn their heads, and walk on, hoping to avoid crossing Jamila's path. Amina, for her part, tried to endure the mistreatment. She had no one to turn to. Her friends at school kept their distance, aware of Jamila's control over the family. The other women in the village gave her sympathetic glances, but never offered to help. Amina had long since stopped hoping for any kindness from the world around her. She buried her pain deep inside, doing her best to fulfill the impossible demands placed on her, hoping that maybe one day things would change. However, Jamila's anger eventually reached a boiling point. She had been simmering with resentment for months, watching Amina grow more mature and resilient, her beauty beginning to shine through despite the hardships she faced. Jamila saw in Amina a potential rival, a reminder of the love Amina's father had for her. It was the last straw for Jamila, and she knew that something needed to be done to break Amina once and for all. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Jamila hatched a cruel and sinister plan. She would punish Amina in the only way that would completely strip her of any hope or freedom. She would abandon her in the jungle. The jungle was a place feared by all in the village. Its deep, dark corners were home to wild animals, including fierce tigers and other predators that roamed freely in its depths. Few who entered the jungle ever came back, and those who did were often never the same. Jamila believed that by leaving Amina there, the jungle would do what she could not, break her spirit, and perhaps take her life. That night, Jamila made sure no one was watching as she prepared to execute her plan. She told Amina that she had to go into the jungle to fetch a special herb for a potion, a task Amina had never been asked to perform before. She would go with her, Jamila promised, so Amina wouldn't be afraid. The girl, eager to fulfill the impossible request, had no reason to doubt her stepmother's words. But as they walked deeper into the jungle, Amina began to sense that something was off. The path they were following was unfamiliar, the trees around them growing thicker and more foreboding. Jamila's voice was cold as she spoke, her words carrying an icy tone. She told Amina to wait while she prepared the herb. Amina, confused and trusting, stood quietly as Jamila walked off into the shadows. But moments later, she felt her arms being bound with a rope, and before she could react, she was tied tightly to an ancient tree, its bark rough and scarred by time. Jamila's face twisted into a cruel smile, and Amina's heart sank as she realized the truth. Her stepmother had betrayed her. You're going to learn your place, Jamila spat, her voice filled with venom. The jungle will take care of you now. No one will come looking for you. With those words, Jamila turned and left, disappearing into the jungle's depths without a second glance. Amina, now alone and helpless, could do nothing but stare at the darkening sky above her. The sounds of the jungle, once distant, now seemed all too close. Her body trembled as she heard the distant growls of wild animals, the rustling of leaves, and the soft padding of paws against the earth. She was alone, trapped in a place of fear and uncertainty, with nothing but the eerie silence of the jungle and the ominous presence of its predators surrounding her. Jamila had hoped that the jungle would do her bidding, that Amina would never return. But little did she know, she had just set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The jungle, as it turned out, was not a place of pure terror for Amina. It held secrets, ancient, untold powers, and Amina's connection to it was about to be revealed in the most unexpected way. Amina's heart raced as she was dragged deeper into the jungle, the dense trees closing in around her like a suffocating blanket. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the eerie silence seemed to hum with an unsettling tension. Her stepmother, Jamila, was silent as she pulled Amina through the underbrush, her steps quick and determined. Amina stumbled, the fear of what was to come rising in her chest. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made her pulse quicken. The jungle was not a place for the faint-hearted, and Amina, who had only ever heard tales of its dangers, could feel the weight of its ancient power bearing down on her. As they reached the heart of the jungle, Amina saw it, the ancient tree. It was massive, its gnarled branches stretching up into the sky, like twisted fingers reaching for the heavens. The tree stood alone in a small clearing, surrounded by thick, tangled vines. This was the place. Amina had heard the stories. This tree was within the territory of a pride of tigers, a pride led by Kwame, the most feared tiger in the entire jungle. Known for his strength and cunning, Kwame had become a legend in the village, his roar said to shake the very earth itself. Amina's legs trembled as Jamila began to tie her to the tree, the rough bark scraping against her skin. Her arms were bound tightly, the ropes cutting into her wrists. The harshness of the situation was overwhelming, and tears filled Amina's eyes as she realized the full extent of what was happening. She had been abandoned, left to die in a place where no one could hear her screams. Jamila stood back, her face devoid of any emotion. "The jungle will take care of you now," she said coldly, her voice filled with malice. "You'll never make it out alive." With those cruel words, Jamila turned and disappeared into the jungle, leaving Amina alone in the heart of the wild, surrounded by the sounds of creatures lurking in the shadows. The wind rustled through the trees, and Amina could hear the faint sound of something moving in the underbrush. A low growl echoed through the clearing, sending a shiver down her spine. It was the sound of the jungle's power, the sound of something ancient and untamable. As Jamila's footsteps faded into the distance, Amina closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The terror she felt was overwhelming, but she refused to give in to despair. Her mind raced, searching for any shred of hope. She could hear the whispers of her ancestors in the wind, the ancient spirits of the jungle who had watched over her people for generations. In that moment, Amina felt a strange connection to the land, a deep sense of belonging she didn't fully understand. She raised her head, her eyes now open, and whispered a prayer to her ancestors. "Please," she begged, her voice barely more than a whisper, "protect me, guide me through this darkness." She could feel the energy of the jungle around her, ancient and alive. It was as though the very earth beneath her feet was alive, watching, waiting. Amina's fear began to fade as she realized that, despite her situation, she was not entirely alone. The spirits of her ancestors and the jungle were with her, their presence a quiet strength that pulsed through her veins. The sounds of the jungle grew louder, an unsettling symphony of growls, rustling leaves, and distant roars. But Amina refused to let fear take hold. She closed her eyes again, focusing on her breath, feeling the rhythm of the jungle around her. In this moment, she understood that the jungle was not just a place of danger, it was a place of power, a place where the spirits of the past lived on. Though she was terrified, Amina refused to give up hope. There was a strength inside her, something she had never fully understood until now. She felt the presence of something greater than herself, something that had been with her all along. The jungle, with all its dangers and mysteries, was not her enemy. It was her ally. As the night fell and the jungle grew darker, Amina's resolve strengthened. She would survive. She had no choice but to survive. The jungle, with its fierce tigers and ancient secrets, would not break her. It was not her end, but the beginning of something she could not yet comprehend. And with that, Amina allowed herself to rest, her heart steady, her spirit unbroken. The jungle was alive with unseen eyes watching from the shadows. Amina, still tied to the ancient tree, could feel their presence before she even saw them. The low growls echoed through the clearing, growing closer, more menacing. Her heart pounded as the underbrush rustled, and then, silence, the kind that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Then, out of the darkness, the first tiger emerged. Its sleek body moved with a deadly grace, its golden eyes locked onto her. Another followed, then another, until a full circle of tigers surrounded her. They were massive, their muscles rippling beneath their striped fur, their tails flicking as they observed her with intense curiosity. Amina held her breath. This was it. This was how she would die. But the attack never came. Instead of lunging, the tigers simply watched her. Their deep, rumbling growls were not of hunger or rage, but something else, something ancient. Amina, trembling, forced herself to meet their gaze. Fear clawed at her, but deep within, something else stirred, a sense of familiarity, of belonging. Then, the jungle itself seemed to hold its breath as a new presence entered the clearing, a tiger unlike any other. Kwame, the leader of the pride, moved with an air of undeniable authority. His coat was darker, his stripes bolder, his body massive and powerful, but it was his eyes that captured Amina's attention, deep amber, glowing with an intelligence that sent chills down her spine. When he stopped before her, the other tigers bowed their heads in submission. Amina's breath hitched as Kwame stepped closer, his face mere inches from hers. She could feel the warmth of his breath, see the sharpness of his fangs. Yet, instead of fear, she felt something else entirely, a strange, unspoken bond. Then, the impossible happened. A voice, deep and resonant, filled her mind, not spoken aloud, but heard within her very soul. "You are not meant to die here, child of the jungle." Amina gasped, her eyes widening. She could hear him, understand him. Kwame's gaze never wavered. "You are not just any girl. You carry the blood of the guardians. The jungle knows you, and you belong to it as much as it belongs to you." Amina's mind spun. Guardians, bloodline, it made no sense. She was just a village girl, a girl abandoned to die. Yet, deep inside, something awakened. A memory not her own. Visions of warriors standing beside tigers, of ancient rituals under moonlit canopies, of a bond between humans and beasts that had been lost to time. Kwame's voice rumbled again. "You have forgotten who you are, but the jungle has not." Amina's pulse thundered in her ears. Everything she had ever known was shifting, changing. The very fate she had feared had become something entirely different. She was no longer just a helpless girl tied to a tree. She was something more, something powerful, and the jungle had just remembered her. Amina's heart pounded as Kwame's words echoed in her mind. "You are the last of your kind, the one chosen to restore what was lost." Her ancestors, guardians of the jungle. It sounded impossible, yet deep inside, something stirred, a feeling of recognition, like a forgotten song playing in the back of her mind. Kwame's massive paw moved forward, his razor-sharp claws glinting in the moonlight. Amina flinched, but the tiger did not strike. Instead, he slashed through the ropes binding her to the tree. She collapsed to the ground, gasping, feeling the blood rush back into her limbs. The other tigers did not move. They simply watched, their golden eyes reflecting something more than curiosity, respect. Amina looked down at her hands. Something was different. The moment she was freed, it was as if the jungle had awakened inside her. She could hear the whisper of the wind, the rustling of leaves speaking in a language she had never understood before. She could feel the heartbeat of the earth beneath her, pulsing in rhythm with her own. Kwame stepped closer, his deep voice resonating within her mind. "Your ancestors walked among us, not as rulers, but as protectors. They spoke our language, understood our ways, but time buried their legacy, and the jungle fell into chaos. Now, you are the last. The spirits have chosen you to bring balance once more." Amina's breath caught. The jungle protectors, her own bloodline. She had always felt a strange connection to nature, but she had never questioned it, never understood it, until now. She stood slowly, the energy of the jungle coursing through her veins. She turned her gaze to the tigers, no longer afraid. Their presence no longer felt threatening, but familiar. They were not beasts to be feared. They were her kin. She took a step forward, and the jungle responded. The wind carried her movements. The ground softened beneath her bare feet, and the sounds of the night seemed to align with the rhythm of her heartbeat. Kwame let out a deep, approving growl. You feel it, don't you? The power of the jungle flowing through you. It has always been there, waiting for you to awaken. Amina swallowed hard, realization settling in. She wasn't just a lost girl abandoned in the forest. She was something more, something greater. She was the jungle's chosen guardian. Amina closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of the jungle within her. It was no longer just a forest of shadows and dangers. It was alive, breathing, connected to her in a way she had never imagined. The whispers of the leaves, the distant calls of birds, the steady rhythm of paws against the earth. She understood them all. Kwame stepped forward, his massive form towering over her. The jungle recognizes you as its own. His voice rumbled in her mind. Now, it will answer to you. Amina took a deep breath and raised her hands. Instinct guided her as she focused, reaching out, not with her body, but with her spirit. A rustling swept through the trees, and within moments the jungle responded. Birds took flight, their wings forming a swirling pattern in the sky. Monkeys chattered excitedly, leaping from branch to branch. Even the insects seemed to hum in unison, recognizing the presence of their new guardian. Then came the tigers. One by one, they stepped closer, bowing their heads in submission. Amina felt their emotions: pride, loyalty, trust. They were not her pets, nor her subjects. They were her allies, her family. She understood their hunger, their fears, their instincts. In turn, they understood her purpose. A deep warmth spread through her chest. This was not power forced upon her. It was something that had always been inside her, waiting for the moment she was ready to embrace it. A sudden gust of wind rustled the leaves, carrying with it a voice not of the present, but of the past, the spirits of her ancestors. Their words were not spoken, but felt. Knowledge flooded her mind, ancient laws, sacred rituals, the delicate balance between the jungle and the village. You are the bridge between two worlds, the protector of harmony. Use your gift wisely. Amina dropped to her knees as the weight of her destiny settled upon her. This was more than survival, more than revenge against Jamila. This was a calling. She stood, her eyes shining with newfound strength. The jungle had chosen her. The spirits had blessed her. Now it was time to fulfill her destiny. Jamila stood in the center of the village, her voice dripping with sorrow as she spoke to the gathered crowd. It is a tragedy, my dear friends. Amina was never strong enough to survive on her own. She ran into the jungle in fear, and, well, we all know what happens to those who enter the tiger's land. She lowered her head, feigning grief. The villagers murmured among themselves. Some pitied the girl, but most were afraid of questioning Jamila's words. She was cunning, and with Amina gone, she saw no obstacles in her way. Her husband's estate, his possessions, his influence in the village, all of it would be hers. With a triumphant smirk hidden beneath her false tears, she turned to the village chief. With no rightful heir left, it is only fair that I take over his legacy, don't you think? Before the chief could respond, a deep growl cut through the air. The villagers turned toward the sound, their eyes widening in terror. From the jungle's edge, figures emerged. Not just any figures, but tigers, their golden eyes glowing in the dimming light. Birds circled overhead, and the trees swayed as if the jungle itself was moving with them. And at the center of it all stood Amina. She was no longer the helpless girl they once knew. Her presence radiated strength, her posture unshaken. Draped in garments woven from jungle vines and adorned with feathers, she looked like something out of legend. The tigers flanked her, their powerful bodies moving in perfect sync with hers. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Some fell to their knees, whispering in disbelief. She walks with the tigers. She commands the jungle. Jamila stumbled backward, her face draining of color. No, this isn't possible. Amina stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. You lied to them, Jamila. You tried to erase me. But the jungle does not forget, and neither do I. The village held its breath. This was not the Amina they had once ignored. This was something greater, something untouchable. And for the first time in her life, Jamila felt true fear. The village square fell into a heavy silence as Amina stood tall before Jamila. The once feared stepmother now looked small and powerless in the face of the girl she had abandoned. The villagers watched with wide eyes, unable to believe what they were witnessing. "You tried to erase me," Amina said, her voice steady. "You tied me to a tree, left me to die, and then came back here to claim what was never yours." Jamila clenched her fists. "Lies!" she spat. "She's bewitched. This is not the Amina we knew." A deep growl rumbled through the air. Kwame, the leader of the tigers, stepped forward, his golden eyes locked onto Jamila. His presence alone was enough to send shivers through the crowd. Amina didn't flinch. "The jungle has judged you, Jamila, and so have the spirits of our ancestors." Jamila's breathing grew ragged. She looked around, searching for anyone to defend her, but the villagers had turned against her. The fear that once kept them silent was gone, replaced with realization and anger. "You beat her. You starved her. You left her for dead," an elder woman murmured, shaking her head. "She's the rightful heir to her father's legacy," another man added. The murmurs grew louder, turning into shouts. Jamila took a step back, panic flashing in her eyes. "You don't understand," she cried. "I did what was necessary. She was weak." The tigers took a step forward. The people did too. "There is no place for you here," Amina declared. "Leave now, or the jungle will take what it is owed." Jamila's face twisted in rage, but she knew she had lost. With one last look of hatred, she turned and ran, disappearing into the wilderness. The villagers erupted into cheers. They surrounded Amina, bowing their heads in respect. "You are more than your father's daughter," the village chief said. "You are our protector now." Amina looked at the jungle, then at her people. "We will live as one, the jungle and the village. Neither will take from the other. We will protect it, and it will protect us." And so, Amina, once abandoned and forgotten, became more than just a girl. She became legend. Amina stood at the heart of the village, surrounded by both people and the animals of the jungle. The same villagers who once ignored her suffering now looked to her for guidance. The tigers rested at her side, their once feared presence now a symbol of protection rather than danger. "The jungle and the village are not enemies," Amina said. "For too long, we have taken from the land without understanding its needs. That must change." The villagers listened intently. They had seen the power of the jungle firsthand. They had witnessed how the spirits had chosen Amina, and they knew better than to question the will of their ancestors. Amina began teaching them the old ways, lessons that had been long forgotten. She showed them how to read the signs of nature, how to respect the animals, and how to live without harming the balance of the jungle. Hunters learned to take only what was needed, and farmers worked with the land rather than against it. Over time, Amina's wisdom spread beyond her village. Other tribes came to seek her counsel, amazed at how her people thrived without conflict with the jungle. She welcomed them, sharing her knowledge, ensuring that the harmony she had built would extend far beyond her home. No longer was she the abandoned girl tied to a tree. Amina had become something greater, a leader, a guardian, a legend. Years passed, and Amina's name became more than just a memory. It became a legend. Children sat around the village fires, listening to elders recount the tale of the girl who had been left to die, but rose as the protector of the jungle. Under her guidance, the village flourished. No longer did people fear the jungle, nor did the jungle fear them. The balance she restored ensured that both could thrive side by side. The tigers, once symbols of terror, became sacred guardians, respected and protected by all. Even after Amina's time, the villagers swore they could still feel her presence in the wind rustling through the trees, in the watchful eyes of the tigers that still roamed the land. Some claimed that on quiet nights, Kwame's descendants could be seen standing at the village's edge, as if waiting for their leader's return. Amina was never forgotten. Her name lived on, whispered in the rustling leaves, sung in the voices of the people, and carried in the heartbeat of the jungle she had saved. Amina's legend lives on, a tale of strength, courage, and destiny. But what if her story wasn't just a legend? What if the spirits of the jungle still watch, waiting for the next guardian? If you were in her place, would you rise or fall? Share your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unforgettable stories.